Ah, romance. That sweeping sensation you get when you meet the one. However, it takes a lot of time and effort to find that one, something many of us know all too well. Are there any famous examples of a couple falling out of love? Plenty, but you don't love someone for their looks, or their clothes, or their fancy car, but because they sing a song only you can hear. Find out who said that, and whose end to romance will be the focus of today's episode. This is Romanticist Speaker's Corner. Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Speaker's Corner, and I am the host, Tim Byron. If you've been with us for some time, then you're well aware we love here when speaking on our corner. We love finding out about love and falling in love, even with the universe itself, such as when humanity recently landed a craft on Mars, of all places. You can watch that video on this channel here. Right here. Yes? Good. Yes, it's a general love fest corner here on which I speak, and I welcome you to it with open arms, whilst maintaining 2 meters of distance, of course. I do adhere to health protocols after all. I'm not a monster. But love has its pitfalls too, and to quote one of England's greatest poets, "'Tis better to have loved and lost than never to have loved at all." Can you guess who that was? Blimey, even I'll admit that's a tough one, and I did the ruddy voice. I'll give you a hint. During the Victorian era, he was arguably the 3rd most popular person. It was Her Majesty Queen Victoria, Prime Minister William Gladstone, and this man. Any guesses? Any from the back? No? It was Lord Alfred Tennyson. Bet you never pictured him with a Lincolnshire accent, but that's where he was born and grew up in a, well, rather dysfunctional home. The man is a worthy subject for a future episode, but today's will focus on what he was saying, that it is better to have experienced love and lost it, rather than to gainsay oneself it. The broken heart. The muse of countless songs, poems, and all other forms of art. Many people have made quite the careers out of it, rolling in the deep with it, as it were. Falling in love is fanciful and wonderful, but that pain of separation from what one expected to be love is ubiquitous, yet personal. There are situations in which one can fall out of love without there being any acrimony or sense of deep loss. A conscious uncoupling, or whatever the bloody hell that is. Such an example pertains to one of the wittiest people that ever lived, Mr. Oscar Wilde. Not just a brilliant playwright and poet, he was a man that had a way with words and general conversation as well. Some cause happiness wherever they go, others whenever they go. One of my favourite ones, that. Get out of here. Not as funny is the relationship that happened between Oscar and his wife, Constance. No, it isn't that sad story, per se, because Mr Wilde, much like Lord Tennyson, merits his own episode, but the focus of today's episode will be what happened between Mr and Mrs Wilde. A young Oscar met a young Constance Lloyd in 1881, and had proposed to her by 1884 in a marriage that resulted in mutual love, admiration, respect, and 2 children. He famously called her that Constance Lamp. He did, after all, dedicate his life's work to her prior to his demise, which came 2.5 years after Constance's. I can write no stately proem as a prelude to my lay. From a poet to a poem, I would dare to say. For if of these fallen petals one to you seem fair, Love will waft it till it settles on your hair. And when wind and winter harden all the loveless land, it will whisper of the garden. You will understand. He said he felt incomplete without her. He even urged his friends to get married. That's how much he loved her, evangelizing the virtue of marriage about someone he held so dear and in such profound affection. Of course, this may not seem shocking to those unaware of Mr. Wilde's history, but he was someone famously, rather infamously, homosexual at the time, which ended up with him serving a 2-year prison term. Therefore, it was quite noteworthy for someone whose sexual leanings appeared to be homosexual at the time to promote heterosexual marriage, and from what we can tell, this advertisement was not one of societal self-preservation, but of a profound care and unyielding devotion to his life partner. Admittedly, it is difficult to ascertain Mr. Wilde's sexuality. Bisexual, homosexual, somewhere else on the spectrum? Who knows? And more importantly, who bloody cares? The problem was that far too many in his own time cared too much about his sexual preferences, which we can somewhat surmise as mostly homosexual, given that he fell in love with the young Lord Alfred Douglas, or Bosie, and wrote such flirtatious, with a stretch a little romantic, maybe, letters to him as their love blossomed, with Wilde writing in one letter, "You are so dear, so wonderful. I think of you all day long and miss your grace, your boyish beauty, the bright sword-play of your wit, the delicate fancy of your genius, so surprising always in its sudden swallow flights towards north and south, toward sun and moon, and above all, yourself." Entertaining, and a little beautiful, no? But nothing like "From a poet to a poem." Ah, what a beautiful thing to call her a poem. His Constance was a soulmate, in a more pragmatic sense. They had children and raised them together, wrote children's books. Oscar fostered and promoted Constance's writing, so it was a marriage of mutual respect, love, admiration, and possibly practicality. Perhaps it was missing a spark of sexual or carnal passion, but it seems like they sincerely loved one another. Last episode, I covered the tumultuous menage-a-trois that were the Nelsons and Lady Hamilton, and this time we deal with the Mr. and Mrs. Wilde along with Bosie. I'm developing a certain theme here, aren't I? Better watch out. Nonetheless, it is quite evident that Oscar did love Constance, and vice versa, but a different kind of life-sharing love, much like a warm blanket in bed keeps the chills away and leaves one in a constant state of comfort. His relationship with Bosie, however, was a raging fire of corporeal desire that Oscar clearly illustrated through his poems, which he dedicated to his younger lover. His love affair with Bosie was what ultimately led him to Reading Gaol, in prison garb with a thick veil to cover his face. He famously suffered from malnourishment and duress, and the whole messy affair, a pun not intended, when Bosie's father accused Wilde of sodomy, which Oscar countersued for libel. That is, when the homosexual relationships of his life came to light, that in turn forced him to drop the libel suit, that ultimately led him to spend 2 years in prison for gross indecency. Blimey. The time he spent in Reading Gaol, which inspired his ballad, shall probably be a video for another day, but suffice it to say that he rather reasonably languished in prison. Upon his release from jail, his friends recommended that he reform and forget his time and reasons for imprisonment, to which he replied, "To regret one's own experiences is to arrest one's own development. To deny one's experiences is to put a lie into the lips of one's own life." He clearly did not want to forget, but he did refer to it as a development. Did he learn from his affair and regret his tryst with Bosie? That he learned a lesson about the follies of adultery, or simply did he just learn other things that developed him as a person during his time in jail? Whatever the answer is, his love stories, both fictional or not, went down in history, and we're still fascinated by them to this very day. Constance, however, could no longer tolerate the attention that Oscar's relationship had inflicted upon the family, though it is plausible that she still cared for him, considering that she visited the wordsmith whilst in prison to tell him of his mother's passing. Arguably, there was love there, but she felt the need to separate herself and their children from the playwright, and had him effectively renounce parental rights, despite never divorcing. She even changed her and their son's name to an ancestral surname of Holland, in an attempt to distinguish themselves from the scandal. She left for Switzerland during the imprisonment, after which they would never see their father again. Despite all this, though, the boys had fond memories of their childhoods and said Oscar was a loving parent. All of this to say that it is reasonable to conclude that both Oscar and Constance still cared for one another, even though they had clearly fallen out of love. Oscar had his own reasons, and she hers as well, but there is little mistaking the love existed between them. What a tale. Constance died aged 40 in Genoa from a botched surgery in a grisly manner, whilst Oscar followed her shortly to the grave 2.5 years later, aged 46 from meningitis. Well, they can't always be so cheery. Nonetheless, it shows that even the greats go through heartache like the rest of us, and maybe miss out on what we can have for what we want to have. Sometimes it is not as complicated as it ought to be, but there are so many mitigating circumstances in this tale to make it all so simple. Something to think about, I suppose. But either way, please do share this video. Like, comment, subscribe, all that jazz. I love to hear from you. Thank you, as always, for listening. It has been my pleasure. From me to you, this has been Tim from Speaker's Corner. Pip pip, cheerio, and of course, here's looking at you, kid. Hello again, my lovelies. Thank you so much for watching that video. It really means a lot. Well, what can I say? Keep the smile going. Do remember to subscribe, ring that bell. It helps out like you wouldn't believe. It just makes me so happy. You can see this big smile of mine. Keep calm, carry on, keep a stiff upper lip, and if you like, there are some other channels in the description. I apologise for their content, but I think they're worth a watch, probably. If anything, just to educate yourself. Best of the British to you. Pip pip, cheerio. And don't forget to subscribe. Till next time, this was Speaker's Corner. Ta-ra.